Hi, my name is Tony Dong. Fact check: Trump keeps much of Obama's Cuba policy. Havana President Donald Trump's announcement that he's cancelling his predecessor's policy toward Cuba is a good deal less than meets the ear. Trump's move, announced Friday in Miami, actually leaves in place most of the important elements of President Barack Obama's moves to open relations with the island. And while his policy has the stated aim of helping the country's nascent private sector, it contains a measure that could damage thousands of small business people who host, feed and transport independent American travelers to Cuba. Trump's policy keeps a U.S. embassy open in Havana and allows U.S. airlines and cruise ships to continue service to Cuba. Cuban Americans can still send money to relatives and travel to the island without restriction. U.S. farmers can continue selling their crops to the Cuban government. The new policy aims to starve military-linked businesses of cash by banning any U.S. payments to them. It pledges to help the entrepreneurial class that has grown since President Raul Castro enacted changes after taking office a decade ago. Effective immediately, I am cancelling the previous administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba, Trump said. We will very strongly restrict American dollars flowing to the military, security and intelligence services that are the core of the Castro regime. He promised concrete steps to ensure that investments flow directly to the people so they can open private businesses and begin to build their country's great future. The policy will undoubtedly reduce the flow of cash to Giza, the military-linked conglomerate that operates dozens of hotels and other tourism-related businesses. But those businesses host hundreds of thousands of Canadian, European and Latin American tourists a year, and do unfettered business with corporations from around the world, reducing the impact of any U.S. cutoff. Weakening the impact further, Trump's policy carves out exceptions in the military ban for airlines, cruise ships, agricultural sales and remittances. The policy also allows Americans to continue patronizing state-run hotels and other businesses that are not directly linked with Cuba's military and state security services. And, of course, nothing prevents the Cuban government from simply moving revenue over to the military or state security, a vulnerability in the policy that the White House has not addressed. The policy risks harming independent business people by restoring a requirement for most American travelers to visit Cuba as part of tightly regulated tour groups. The Cuban government has traditionally steered those tour groups to state-run business, meaning the majority of American travelers to Cuba will probably no longer be able to patronize private restaurants, bed and breakfasts and taxi drivers. Private entrepreneurs say Americans represent a disproportionate share of their revenue because they spend more than other travelers for high-end services that badly run state-operated business typically cannot provide. Trump also demanded the return of U.S. fugitives including Joanne Chesimard, a black militant convicted in 1977 of the murder of a New Jersey state trooper. The harboring of criminals and fugitives will end, Trump said. You have no choice. It will end. Many of the high-profile fugitives in Cuba are black or Puerto Rican militants who were offered political asylum by Fidel Castro during the 1970s and 1980s. Cuba has repeatedly said it will not renege on the promise of the former president, who died in November. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.
Who vowed to defend Trump's travel ban in the future. Boente is followed, on the succession list, by the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of North Carolina, John Stewart Bruce, and the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Texas, John Parker. Both are career prosecutors who are serving in their posts on an interim basis, until a presidential appointment is made. But they would not need to be Senate confirmed to take over. It was not clear why the Trump administration chose those 3 U.S. attorneys to be in the succession line. During the Obama administration, sources familiar with the drafting of the old executive order said, the positions were chosen based on geographic diversity, and purposely included big cities where officials assumed there would be a talented attorney capable of stepping in. The U.S. attorneys on the succession list were from Washington, D.C., Chicago and Los Angeles. Some former Justice Department officials said they would find it inconceivable for Trump to clean house, or to fire Mueller, even taking into account the sometimes erratic behavior of the commander-in-chief. This president is so unpredictable, it's hard to say, says Emily Pierce, a former Justice Department official in the Obama administration. It would be the craziest thing he's done to date if he were to start firing the special counsel Rosenstein. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt that he realizes how much trouble he may be in, and that with the firing of Comey, he wouldn't do that. But others were less willing to predict the actions of a president who prides himself on being unpredictable. At the rate we're going, it's clearly possible, because you could go through a number of people in one go depending on the things that are asked of them, says Jane Chong, a national security and law associate at the Hoover Institution. If Rosenstein had refused to write a memo laying out the case for Comey's firing, you can imagine him being fired, and you can imagine Brand doing the same thing. It's not difficult to see a scenario like that playing out down the line, Chong said. In Washington circles, the comparison being made is between Trump's desire to rid himself of Mueller, at potentially any cost, and the Saturday Night Massacre during Watergate, in 1973, when the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General both resigned after refusing to obey President Richard Nixon's order to fire Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. It fell to the Solicitor General at the time, Robert Burke, to do the deed. I think the Watergate scenario would make most self-respecting lawyers loath to put themselves in the role that Burke ended up playing, said Brian Fallon, a former Obama Justice Department and Hillary Clinton spokesman. Most career-minded independent lawyers that have high regard for the Justice Department as an institution would be loath to be the modern-day equivalent to Burke. But Trump, too, is cognizant of the comparison to Nixon, according to one advisor. The president, who friends said does not enjoy living in Washington and is strained by the I think the Watergate scenario would make most self-respecting lawyers loath to put themselves in the role that Burke ended up playing, said Brian Fallon, a former Obama Justice Department and Hillary Clinton spokesman. Most career-minded independent lawyers that have high regard for the Justice Department as an institution would be loath to be the modern-day equivalent to Burke. But Trump, too, is cognizant of the comparison to Nixon, according to one advisor. The president, who friends said does not enjoy living in Washington and is strained by the demanding hours of the job, is motivated to carry on because he doesn't want to go down in history as a guy who tried and failed, said the advisor. He doesn't want to be the second president in history to resign. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.
Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.